It's a bright sunny day outside today, so I thought I'd spend a few minutes talking about the topic for the upcoming week. As you know, it's on supply chain and some of the supply chain challenges. And the background, is within the past 20 years, the business community decided they could increase profits and efficiency by doing the things such as just-in-time inventory, among other names. And the purpose was is that rather than maintain large inventories of stock, have your supply chain set up such that they would be delivered just in time to be needed. So you wouldn't have enough money spent on supplies and backup materials sitting on the shelves. It also allowed them to create markets and manufacturing plants in other countries, rely on a less expensive labor, and then still be able to ship them to the United States to their factory and be able to use them for the manufacturer. And as long as everything went smoothly, the system would work out reasonably well. Somehow in the planning, they did not think too much about what happens if there's a disruption in the supply chain. What happens if we have some challenges? Whether they thought about it or not, the reactions that have happened over the past few years indicates that perhaps they didn't think well enough. Supply chains rely on transportation. Transportation relies on equipment. Equipment relies on workers. Workers rely on healthy environment in which to work and go to work. All of those were incredibly disrupted over the last 2 years, 2.5 years with COVID. The number of people that left, the shutdown of markets, the backlog of inventory that needed to be produced, then finding workers who would be able to create those products, and then the backlog in shipping. And you had the backups you had in China. You had the backups you saw at the ports on the West Coast and on the East Coast. As ships, dozens of ships were sitting out moored outside the port, waiting for access to the port so they could start unloading. Once they got permission to get access to the ports, then they had the issue of finding the stevedores, the shore workers, who could then operate the heavy equipment to unload and deliver those box cars, if you will, those trailer loads, into a system called row, which is roll on, roll off. So it's the idea that in one country you'd pack the containers full, load them and stack them high on ships, send them overseas to their destination, and then using the large cranes that are available in places like Daniels Island and Charleston, if you travel in that area, to move those trailers off of the ships, then put them onto flatbeds, tie them down, and then ship them off. Part of that also involved creating what was known as inland ports, which basically were land transportation terminals. If you travel between Columbia and Greenville, you see in Lawrence where Kmart has a massive distribution center. As you head down to Charleston, the free trade zone, you will see massive distribution centers where trucks come in, unload, they're sorted out within that facility, and then loaded up to ship off on other trucks going to other parts of the country. The same process, of course, is used not only in the trucking industry, but in the rail industry as well, where they're then loaded, sometimes stacked double high on the flatbed of train cars and moving that way. So again, as long as the system's working smoothly, you can have the material made in one country, less expensive labor, have it packed up, put on ships or trains to get to a port, to put it on the transportation, oftentimes massive cargo ships, and then have it shipped across the world and everything worked perfectly. But how would you handle that? How would you deal with that environment when you have all the disruptions that we've had over the past 3 years? Or was it a good idea in the long term to be able to use this just-in-time inventory, this idea of the backlogs in the shipping process? Those are the challenges that are raised by the articles and in the information that you have this week to read through. And all of you have seen the pain at the pump for gasoline prices, in part because of transportation issues. The United States has a few key refineries, but they still require trains and or tractor trailers to transport them off the pipeline distribution centers and into local gasoline stations. You saw that with food product, and all you need to realize is that so much of the food we eat is not really grown in the United States. Here in the Southeast, a lot of it comes from South America, from Chile. A lot of the seafood that we eat comes from Vietnam and again from South America. And so it's in every industry. Look at the fruits and the grapes that you buy. Oftentimes they are not from the United States, which in and of itself is not a problem, but it all relies on shipping, it all relies on transportation. It all relies on this whole thing that's broadly defined as a supply chain. Was it a good idea at the time? That's for you to think about. Is it still a good idea today from a pure business perspective? But that also is something for you to think about in the process. Again, the idea behind it is reducing cost by having minimal inventory on hand, and you arrange your shipping and your transportation such that the resources you need arrive just in time so you don't slow down the production line. But you see that in a lot of ways. So associated, although indirectly with this entire question, is that of the availability of raw materials to create. Look at the shortage we have in microchips that are needed on modern vehicles. To what extent is that a reflection of the supply chain extended beyond just shipping and transportation, but including access to the natural materials and natural resources that are needed? Things like precious metals and whatnot that we may not hear enough about, but we move more and more into a computer world that relies on more sophisticated minerals, many of which cannot be man-made, then that becomes a supply chain issue as well. And again, look at the impact on the automotive industry because of the lack of microchips to operate all the computers. So there's a lot wrapped up in this idea. And the bottom line is when it's working efficiently, you can cut costs. When it's not working efficiently, then the cost to the consumer increases significantly to compensate for the disruptions that are happening in the supply chain. And they do that in a variety of ways. Perhaps the most common is they raise prices. But a way to raise prices without raising prices from the consumer's perspective is just downsize the packaging. I've noticed that recently with ice cream, with salads, from a lot of things that are packed by volume, not by weight, or vice versa. So you have big packaging that looks the same, but the contents inside are a bit smaller. So all that gets wrapped up in these challenges that we have, and especially in an environment where we rely so heavily on international production to meet the needs that we have in this country. So as you read through the articles in the section this week, put that in a bit of perspective and understand how you balance the needs of businesses and industry with the final cost to consumers when we face these challenges. The one thing that I've noticed, and I've put on most of your assignments that I've sent back, is we have minor grammatical errors, spelling errors, and just about every word processor that you have now has an editor function that allows you to have it run, look through, will show you misspelled words, perhaps inappropriate words, grammatical errors such as punctuation, capitalization. Take advantage of those, and you'll see that oftentimes that's a half a letter or perhaps even a letter grade reduction, because at the college level, citation is a critical skill set to have. And while you think it may only be in college, and this is something you won't use in the future, nothing could be farther from the truth. No matter what field you go into, you're always going to be asked, what's your source? Where did you get that information? How reliable is that information? And that's one of the purposes of citing your work, not only to avoid the challenge of plagiarism, which is using someone else's work and claiming it as your own, but also to allow the person who's reading, the consumer, if you will, of your research, to know where they can look for further information, for more access, more perspectives on the challenge. So several links have been put to especially Chicago Manual of Style, the Chicago Style Manual, this is alternatively called, which is kind of the holy grail for all things citation. I've put several resources on LinkedIn as well about just quick and dirty questions on how to avoid plagiarism, minor grammatical errors. I also put down a copy of a PowerPoint that I've done to explain the importance of proper citation technique in college level writing. If you have questions, let me know. I'll be glad to respond. I try to be as open as I can in the comments that I make. For those of you that don't think you're doing as well as you would have liked to do, realize that part of the reason I don't use gradebook is because my rubric has a built-in way to give you credit for improvement in your writing skill. So if you do poorly at the beginning and I see progress toward the end, those assignments that are turned in the last half of the semester are given more weight than those turned in earlier in the semester based on the improvement in the quality of the work. As I say again, on most of your assignments, presentation matters. So 2 essays with basically identical wording. One is properly spelled, properly punctuated, uses proper citation technique, is going to receive a higher grade than someone that has common grammatical errors, misspelled words, and don't use citations. So again, have a look at those resources I put in, very critical, as we all should know at this point, for college level writing. It sounds like a challenge and it will take a bit of learning, but once you get in the habit of using citations, it's much easier. Another thing or tool you may not have noticed is most, again, modern word processors also have a way to embed footnotes and create bibliographies, or some type of citation manager, as they're called, that will help you do that. So check out all of those resources to improve the quality of the college level writing that you do. Keep up the good work. I've enjoyed reading a lot of the essays. They're very insightful, very pleasant reads. And finally, don't forget the end, we do not have any exams in this class. So remember those final assignments, and we'll talk about that as we get past the mid part of the semester. So have a great day. Enjoy the weekend. It's beautiful weather. And if you have questions, by all means, let me know, and we will answer them and hopefully make sure you're satisfied that you're moving in the right direction. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.